Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur. I hope that you're doing well. I hope you're having a great week. Since it's Tuesday, I thought I'd do a quick Tag Tuesday book tag video. It's going to be the Eclectic Reader Tag. It was created by Cozy Reader Kelly. Her original tag video is really quite fun, quite delightful. I was kindly tagged by Noah from Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse, and I will link both those videos in the description box below. And I was hesitant to do this tag because honestly, of all the channels and friends I've made here on BookTube and on Bookstagram, I really feel in a lot of ways that I'm sort of the quintessential stay-in-your-lane reader. So an eclectic reader tag, that's a page too far. I'm not sure how we're going to handle this, but let's give it a shot anyways. Prompt 1, where do you get your book recommendations? Well, from all of you. But before that, I'd like to describe the process I went through. It was a long and arduous process. It turned me into the quintessential stay-in-your-lane reader. So I read a huge amount of nonfiction when I was a kid, when I was in my adolescent years, just almost nonstop nonfiction. I actually learned the Dewey Decimal System so that I could go to the public library and sort of find the books I wanted to read. And then what I discovered sometime in late grade school, maybe I was 10, 11, 12 years old, was that if there was a specific book I was interested in and I found that book in the library, the other books around it were probably around the same topic. And so if I wanted to read all of the books around a topic, I could do that over the course of a month or so. And that was what I did. And so I would sort of go from topic to topic and just jump around. And I almost exclusively read nonfiction and then science fiction and fantasy novels. That was it. So very late into high school, I got into reading Dostoevsky and a handful of other writers, Steinbeck, a handful of other writers, where I read pretty much all of their works when I was 16, 17. So then later on in college, I started wanting to, read more fiction. And I was like, where am I going to find this? Well, so I turned, as one will, to, let's look at lists of award winners. So Pulitzer Prize winners, National Book Award winners, Booker Prize winners. So I started reading some of those. And then I realized there was this Modern Library Best Novels of the 20th Century list. Coincidentally, many of them were published by the Modern Library. So I started reading some of those. Time Magazine had a list of the 100 best books since Time Magazine had been created, and which I believe was sometime in the 20s. So I started reading some of those. The New York Times did a list, I want to say in 2005 or 2006. It was while I was in college, that said the best books of the past 25 years. So roughly 1980 to 2005. Well, what books received votes? I've read almost all of those now. So what I was doing throughout my 20s was reading from a lot of those types of lists and realizing I spent way too much time reading fiction from the 20th century that I didn't enjoy, but I thought I was supposed to, so I just kept pursuing it. And then I gradually started to discover, things like Reddit and other corners of the internet where you could find somebody talking about the books I did like. 1970s crime novels in the US, spy fiction, modernist fiction. These will all be explored in a later prompt. And so I started to realize, hey, I really enjoy these. And I think the breaking point was probably when Esquire published an infamous 80 books every man should read list. And they all had this like two sentence, one to two sentence thing, because of that friend you had with the beautiful girlfriend. I think that's the recommendation for James Salter's novel, and that's on the list. Or because of adultery and basketball, which is like the recommendation for John Updike's Rabbit Run, which is a terrible book. It's one of the worst books I've ever read. And so when I got to the Esquire list, I realized I've read a bunch of these and they were awful. This list is kind of terrible. That was when it sort of clicked of stop reading the stupid list, pal. Read what you want. And that's what I've done ever since. But thanks to many of you, I found great stuff. The Artifice also had a great list on 6 books to get the gears turning about steampunk. That's a great list. I'll try to link some of these. Anyways, prompt 2, how do you decide what to read next? Well, going back to college, Jack, I would read, as I had said, I would read all the books that the public library had around a specific topic. There were maybe 4 or 5. I would read all of them. Tell you all about Richard III or the Wars of the Roses if you want. another time. However, that transferred to fiction, and so I read almost all of Dostoevsky. I read almost all of Steinbeck, and that happened to, I read all of F. Scott Fitzgerald, all of Ernest Hemingway, things like that. And I started to realize when I was about 19 or 20 years old, this is not a good habit to have. Like, let's mix it up. And so that's something I've really worked to do since I was in college, is to very intentionally mix up what I'm reading so that I'm not reading the same genre back to back. That I might read an essay before I jump into a new novel, or read some poetry, and really just try to be intentional about getting my mind thinking with different types of text, different periods of text. That's something I try to do. And I find that I enjoy what I'm reading a lot more when I do that. Prompt 3, how has your reading taste changed over time? I'm more intentional about jumping between the genres. I'm certainly less aligned to those top lists. I probably read a lot less contemporary or near contemporary fiction. And hopefully I'm reading more widely. So prompt 4, what genres or subgenres do you usually never read? Self-help, body horror, current events. I stopped reading alternate history at some point. I found that I preferred either the history or just like actual science fiction, not historical fantasy. I don't really read, I really enjoy crime fiction, we'll get to that, but I don't particularly enjoy police procedurals. There's a handful of exceptions, especially like long-running police procedurals. I'm really not a fan of those. There's really 2 exceptions, Tony Hillerman and Seol and Walu's Martin Beck novels. I don't read much contemporary autofiction, and I'm not a fan of 19th century realism. Like, really can't stand it. Prompt 5, let's get positive though. What are 5 specific subgenres you enjoy, and include a recommendation for each? Well, I enjoy subgenres. I really enjoy getting into subgenres and having fun there. So we'll start with one that's less ridiculously subgenre, and that would be Greek drama. I love Greek drama. One of the beauties of Greek drama is that it's a subgenre where a person can actually sit down and read every extant work. There aren't that many. I think Euripides has the most plays of all of the different, of the 4 playwrights we have. So Aeschylus has maybe 8 or 9. Sophocles has around, I think Aeschylus might have 12. Sophocles only has about 8, and then Euripides has fewer than 20. Aristophanes, you add him in and you have another maybe like 10 or 12. There's not a huge number of plays. And so it's actually possible to sit and read all of the Greek plays that we have that have come down. And I enjoy them. I really, I enjoy the comedy. I enjoy the tragedy. I find it fascinating. I find it interesting to compare the different versions they will have around myths and stories, and I love it. I will say that 2 of my favorites, one that I don't hear mentioned very often, one would be Alcestis by Euripides, and I just found this cool translation from Anne Carson of 4 plays from Euripides, one of which is Alcestis, and I'm really excited. This is going to be read as soon as I get this awful sticker off the back. But another one would be from Sophocles, and that would be the Trachiniae, or the Women of Trachis. I think, I don't know if I've ever heard anyone else talk about it. I think it's an extraordinary play, and I love the way that Sophocles really tears into Hercules or Heracles, and what that type of character, making that type of person a hero would mean for a family and for a society. I think the Trachiniae is amazing. So, let's stay positive. We're going to talk about modernist novels. I love modernist novels. I almost included a section on like those like wild early novels that are just all over the place and glorious messes. But I'm going to talk about those in another video one day. Let's talk about modernist novels. I love the modernists. I love the ways that they want to experiment with language, the ways that they want to try and represent consciousness or perception on the page. I think it's fascinating. I love the way that they refill the world and the humanity of the novel that the realists have sort of stripped away and just filled with a bunch of details. So, a couple of recommendations. Well, Virginia Woolf would be maybe number 1, period. To the Lighthouse is a great one. Mrs. Dalloway is also fantastic. Another great European modernist who I don't find discussed very frequently would be Joseph Roth. The Radetzky March is an absolute masterpiece. It sort of traces the end of a noble-ish family in the Austro-Hungarian Empire up into World War I. It sort of ends right at the start of World War I. Moving over to the U.S., Gene Toomer's Cain is deeply experimental. It's not just modernist. It's modernist in the sense of almost the way James Joyce is modernist. Not just something that feels like a novel, but something that is really pushing in a lot of different directions. Here, Toomer has a novel that is also a story cycle that also includes poetry and vignettes and actual stories with deep characterization, and it's masterful. Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, sort of one of the closing arguments in modernism, and a fantastic novel, one that I deeply love and appreciate. And then one that I'm probably going to be reading next month will be Under the Volcano from Malcolm Lowry. I'm really excited to have acquired a copy of this and to be jumping into that soon. Another genre that I absolutely love would be crime fiction, specifically crime fiction as a nation or society sort of starts to feel a sense of vulnerability. And so I want to highlight a couple of books really that are from, in the UK, sort of post-World War II, and I think even more specifically after the Suez Crisis. So that would be Ted Lewis. This was originally published as Jack's Return Home, but it's more famous as Get Carter. This is an outstanding book. Just dynamite. And then this is actually a police procedural, but it doesn't feel like one. These were known as the Black novels. That's how dark and bleak they are. An Unnamed Detective, sometimes also called the Factory series. He Died with His Eyes Open by Derek Raymond. And in the U.S., I think it's really books that are written during or after Vietnam. And so I have Cutter and Bone from Newton Thornburg. I cannot recommend this book highly enough, especially if you enjoyed True Detective Season 3. That's almost a must-read. And then Elmore Leonard would be another great one. This is his Library of America 1980s novels. Really, his 70s volume is just as strong, but I think I've shown that before, so I wanted to highlight this one as well. Poetry. I don't think we get enough poetry here on BookTube, despite Poetry Thursdays. And if I was going to talk about a specific subgenre of poetry that I love, it would be the ballads. Even more specifically, those anonymous ballads and songs that we have. Those can be found in the New Penguin Book of Scottish Verse, including the epic Sir Patrick Spence. Love that. Or the Penguin Book of Irish Poetry. And what I love about ballads is that they have for people who don't necessarily think they like poetry, try the ballads because they have stories in them. They have narratives. The ballads were they were stories set to song to a large degree. And so they read almost as short stories, not as poems. And then as you recognize the meter and the rhythm and the hints of imagery that are pushed into the ballads, that almost acts as a gateway into other types of poetry. Perhaps just songs specifically or lyric poetry, and then ultimately to other subgenres of poetry. So give that a shot. And finally, I'm not a huge fan, as I mentioned, of autobiographical fiction, and I don't read a huge amount of contemporary fiction, but the contemporary fiction that I really enjoy, I find is often what I'll call nearly historical fiction. It's set a generation, maybe two generations earlier. And so often it's within the author's lifetime, like when the author was younger. But it doesn't necessarily feel autobiographical. It's not something that happened to the author. It's something the author perhaps perceived as a child or as an adolescent or as a young adult, but is now, it's remembering through a filter and there's a great deal of intention around it. It's not highly autobiographical. It's this intentional narrative that is set at that remove. It's just removed enough for that type of intention to exist and attention to exist, but it feels still authentic. It will have little details of the period that fill it in, and yet they're marvelous stories. So examples from that might be Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. Love this book. David Peace's GB84, or The Round House by Louise Erdrich. So those would be some examples of more contemporary fiction I enjoy that's really set about 1 or 2 generations back. So in terms of who do I tag, this is the Eclectic Reader Tag, so I will tag David Wiley, who's running this Eclectic Reader Book Club. Best of luck with that. I will tag Brandon's Bookshelf, who's been relatively new to BookTube, but he's popping up. I'll tag Jim Reads Too Slow, who is like very, very new to BookTube. He's a science fiction reader. He just started his channel, I want to say last week. I'm looking forward to seeing more from him. I'll tag Revenant Reads, because I think he hits quite a bit of interesting places in his reading. And then I'll tag Lucas from Bits of Lit. So there we have the Eclectic Reader Tag, and I hope you have a great week. Thanks.